I'm sorry for everything I said. I love communism. Comrade, welcome to new video from Business Boys, now known as... I'm gonna stop doing a Russian accent because I'm terrible at it, but this video is brought to you by the DPRK. Not really, it's actually brought to you by something that's not a piece of shit. And that would be today's sponsor, Finimize. I'm gonna have to redo this. I can't imagine Finimize are gonna, go for me, comparing them to DPRK and saying that the benefit of them is they're not a piece of shit. Let me actually tell you something good about them because they are genuinely great. But this video is brought to you by Finimize. That's called a disclosure. That's a business lesson for you right there. Business Blaze viewers, that's you guys. You can get a 7-day free trial with Finimize, a premier finance app that helps you invest with confidence. I'm going to tell you more about them in a bit and how I use it. So yeah, just sit tight because before we get into all of that capitalism nonsense, we've got some communism. Da, comrade! Oh, Danny also starts. Comrades, a spectre is haunting this basement as the ruling classes tremble. Watch me shake, Danny. I'm so afraid. What are you gonna do? Take control of the means of production? Oh! A world to win and nothing to lose but my chains and the radiator, I suppose, which does come in very handy during winter. Yeah, if I ever turned it on. Oh, but before I deliver this manifesto for a revolution, I have a confession to make. I used to be a postman for a while. In fact, I had 2 separate stints working for the Royal Mail. A friend of mine from university, I haven't seen him in like a decade, but I do know he worked for the Royal Mail. I don't know if he still does. I don't know why I'm telling the story, it's not interesting at all. It's the only thing I can think of to talk about when it comes to postmen. Other than my postman where I live now is like, yeah, we got a package for you. It's at the post office. Why can't you deliver my packages? I'm not paying for pickup. The first time round was my proper job after my relationship with my dating agency business broke down due to irreconcilable differences. Ba-da-bum, bum. I found the life of a postman to be very much a mixed mailbag. Ba-da-bum, bum. It was very much dependent on the weather and the location of the mail round that I'd been assigned to that week. You don't get your own permanent round to begin with, you just have to cover for people who are off sick or on holiday. If you hang around for a few years until somebody retires or drops dead from the strain, you might just be lucky to bag your own rounds eventually. I never lasted that long. I know literally nothing about being a postman. Is being a postman a stressful job? Because I can imagine you've got to carry around this heavy you got to do a lot of walking, you got to go to other people's houses. But then again, also, you're just walking around dropping off packages, which, I don't imagine to be the most stressful career in the world. It's not like you're dealing with, I don't know, what's a stressful job? It's not like you're an investment banker or something. And you're like, oh my God, I just lost all my clients' money. Luckily, I'm still rich. Wait, maybe being an investment banker is not so bad because you don't lose your own money. Stressful job. Surgeon? Is that? I don't know. If the sun was shining, and I'd been assigned to a lovely quiet area with a fairly light load of mail, I often felt like I got the best job in the world. I probably would have whistled a jolly good tune if I only knew how. Oh, Danny, you can't drive, you can't whistle. What can you do, mate? But the job felt a bit less pleasant if I was battling through a ferocious hailstorm while getting weighed down with bulging bags of mail in one of the rougher areas of Rotherham. Note, Rotherhammers. I'm getting the pronunciation Rotherhamians. Who gives a notice my pronunciation of Rotherham. I think I'm getting it right. I'm not sure though. Where everybody was hassling me for their gyros. What a gyro? Or their court summons, oh God. And threatening to say, what the a gyro? What is a gyro? It's got a capital G.
Just one gyro. One, and I can get back to work.
Someone enlighten me. And it's something you get in a rough area. Is it like a knockoff biro? I don't know. And threatening to set their dogs on me if I was a bit late. A stray vicious dog once ripped a chunk out of my thigh, but I bravely battled on to the very end of the round before collapsing in a pool of my own blood. Danny, what is going on? Is this even real? Days like that just never seem to be as cheerful. But one thing I noticed during my 2 short spells at Royal Mail was how the whole operation seemed to be at the mercy of the union, who seemed hell-bent on throttling the life out of it at any given opportunity. I'm not going to share my opinion on unions because it will encourage people to smash the dislike button. Angry union meetings were held every week, strikes were called at the drop of a hat, and big advantages were handed over on a plate to Royal Mail's emerging business competitors who became viewed as a more reliable service. Obviously, they've never heard of Yodel. Is it Yodel? What's that one that everyone is such a piece of shit? There's so many that are a piece of shit. But a friend of mine runs a business where he delivers a lot of packages. And I remember, I think my parents were talking about this Yodel company being shit. And then he was like, yeah, we use Yodel because it's by far the cheapest. And I'm like, yeah, mate, because it's shit. It seemed as if the union would rather destroy the whole company than lose a fight with management. Yeah. Unions. And nothing has changed much since then. What a surprise. Just a couple of years ago, the union boss proudly declared to the press that he would rather smash Royal Mail to bits than lose an ongoing dispute over pensions. You clowns. Oh, you gotta smash the dislike button because my opinion on unions, not all unions, many unions, is becoming clear. I got quite friendly with one union rep, even though he was a very odd and very hot-tempered bloke. Yeah, he is part of a union. And over a pint of lager in the local pub after a tough morning's letter posting, I got a rich insight into the extent of his anger over the society of today. This went beyond a postal... Where's the communism, Danny? Unions are not communist enough. This went way beyond a postal union, tossing the odd custard pie in the face of anyone who worked in management. The guy firmly believed that a communist society was the only fair way forward for the good citizens of the UK. Good luck with that one. And while he was happy to concede that communism hadn't quite panned out well in other countries such as the Soviet Union and China, and let me just add in any other country that's tried it, he insisted this was only because the original perfectly sound concepts had been perverted and corrupted by fools. That's a fairly legit argument. Like, the concept of communism is arguably not bad. The implementation of communism is always terrible, but look, we're humans. We're never gonna be able to implement it right. I'm really sorry to say. Like, I am a huge Star Trek fan. I love it in the future where they don't have money and they have everything they need and everyone works for their own prestige and glory and all of this stuff, but for the betterment of themselves and mankind, or however they want to describe it. But I'm like, yeah, it's not happening, is it? And anytime they mention money, like the gold press platinum or whatever in Star Trek, they're like, yeah, people get into that because they love money. Oh, if you're wondering why I'm wearing different glasses, I just realized that I am. It's because my kid broke my other glasses, so I'm wearing my backup pair. I know they don't look as good. I apologize. What are we talking about? He bangs on for hours with his own elaborate manifesto for a new utopia in which there is no such thing as private property until it was finally time to leave the pub. I'll never forget that as we left, I asked if I could borrow a cigarette until tomorrow. He said, no, these are mine, get your own, and disappeared into the bustling crowds of disenchanted workers, all aching for the merciful release of death. Oh, Daddy, this is depressing, but realistic. I know that the subject of communism seems to have crept into quite a few Business Blaze videos, and I have to admit that I'm not even entirely sure why. Me neither, Danny. It's just like, at some point, it's like, why are we talking about communism again?
The reign is actually a lot like communism. When you think about it, at first it sounds really nice, but once you actually get out into it, it is even better!
I think it stems from the Pepsi Navy video, in which we looked at the Pepsi Navy and discovered that there wasn't really any such thing as the Pepsi Navy, so we had to fill up a script with communism instead. But maybe it's time to get it out of our system once and for all. Yeah, good luck with that, Danny. I've got another script here, which I'm going to be reading immediately after this one, called Insanely Overpriced Products Part 2. And let me tell you, there's probably going to be communism in it. Could communism ever be considered a workable and fair concept? Why has communism always failed in the past? And could it ever succeed if handled in the right way? I've given away my opinion on this, haven't I? Did the soap opera Dallas really contribute to the downfall of the communist Soviet Union? 1, I've never seen Dallas, and 2, I've never heard of that, but okay. And why didn't Karl Marx just get off his arse and get a bloody job? The work-shy layabout. I love the word work-shy. It's like a single word. Work-shy. Love it. Hey Siri, define work-shy.
Work-shy means of a person lazy and disinclined to work.
Yeah, fucking right. By the way, I realized that if I do Siri on my iPad rather than on my phone, it works a lot better because it's closer. We obviously don't want to spend ages talking about the entire long-winded history of communism from start to finish, partly because it would need to be a 20-part series, partly because my Ladybird book of communism didn't go into that much detail, and partly because I've already wasted a big chunk of the script waffling on about being a postman. Yeah, Danny, we're 4 pages in. We've barely even started. We've talked about unions. I've ranted about unions. Yeah, we talked about you being a postman. Let's get into the subject, shall we? The other day someone left a comment. It's like, I can't stand this. 6 minutes and he can't get to the point. He can't get to the point. I'll just suggest, if you want someone to get to the point, have you ever considered not watching Business Blaze and maybe cracking a book? You knob. But it still might be useful to briefly explore what exactly communism means and how a third of the world fell under its cold spell for much of the 20th century. Look, a lot of the countries that fell under the spell of communism weren't exactly, volunteering to be under the spell of communism. I live in one of those countries. The people don't have fond memories of being forced to be communists. Of course, communism was effectively a direct response and a two-finger salute to capitalism. We can see the early roots of both models pop up in very early history. Plato was describing communist ideals as early as the 4th century BC, but one of the most significant turning points in capitalist production arrived with the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th and early 19th century. The Industrial Revolution was a pretty big deal in history, and most economic historians would agree that it was the most important event in the progress of mankind since the domestication of animals. Yeah, the Industrial Revolution was this amazing, crazy thing, and it only happened like 100-something years ago. It's wild. Without the Industrial Revolution, we'd still be traveling around in horse-drawn carriages, fighting wars with muskets, and living in a closed world without so much as a telegraph service or a single electronic device. On the plus side, we wouldn't have polluted the earth anywhere nearly as badly. Look though, I don't want to say it's worth it, because it's going to get, people like Greta Thunberg to be like, but it was worth it, wasn't it? Wasn't it? I mean, look, would you rather be riding around in a smelly horse getting polio, or would you be like, the pollution index is looking a bit high today, isn't it? Yeah, but I'll just go inside. I mean, it's alright, isn't it? Or I'll just go to the country. Look, I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything. Let's not pollute the out of the world. Let's do our parts. But also, it was worth it. It's worth it. You naturally had the Luddites arguing that the new automated machinery was putting their jobs at risk. Later on, they staged protests by destroying factories, but they all got shot dead, which seemed to quickly resolve that issue. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty good solution. I mean, dictatorships have tried it world over. I mean, literally, communist dictatorships have done this. It's very effective. I mean, all the people who smashed that dislike button, I have hunted down and shot, allegedly. It's very effective. It's why this channel enjoys such a high like to dislike ratio, despite being a piece of shit. Besides, they were talking out of their asses. The Industrial Revolution witnessed unprecedented growth in new jobs, average incomes, and the standard of living. So all of this seemed to prove that capitalism, a term first coined in the 19th century to describe a free, profit-based market based on supply and demand in which private individuals and companies enjoy complete ownership of production, was working out well. Not everyone completely agreed, though. The Industrial Revolution and the subsequent rise of capitalism was also deemed to dramatically widen the gulf between the rich and the poor. There's certainly no denying that it created huge ripples that affected everybody's daily life in one way or another. Before the revolution, workers would be the owners of their tools of the trade, such as chisels and pickaxes or whatever, and would effectively be self-employed. Emerging new technology may have changed the game completely, but it was expensive and beyond the budget of these workers who were earning a modest income. So, they had to put down their tools and go work for a rich bloke who could afford the new and flashy gear. Some would argue that this put all the rich factory owners in a position of complete control. They could now get away with paying a pittance to the laborers who slaved away every day to help make the factory owners even more fabulously wealthy. Already, I'm like, yeah, this is a really good point. And this is what the Communist Manifesto is. It's basically on capitalism without coming up with a really workable solution. You read the Communist Manifesto and you're like, yeah, capitalism doesn't really work. I mean, there's plenty wrong with it. It's a bit shit. And then it's like, have you tried communism? And you're like, whoa. Yeah, but that's worse. No. One, it's really not well thought out. Two, now we're in the future, we know it doesn't work. But it's like, yeah, no, capitalism is broken. It's kind of but you know what? It's just not worse than communism. That's certainly how Actually, I'm going to take a break now and do the Finimize read, because I say it's got to go in the next line. But I think it's going to be a better breaking point here. This video is brought to you by Finimize, and I love that we are talking about the pinnacle of capitalism as a sponsor on a communism video. But no one's watching this and they love communism. All of those people have already clicked off when they realize that I'm all over their dreams. Finimize is a new app that shares a wealth of financial news and advice so that you can take advantage of stocks and money markets, all of those capitalist things, and all of that financy stuff that your friends are talking about. I wrote that. It's like, yeah, I got friends and they're like, ooh, I invested in this, and have you considered that? And I'm like, bro. But that's where Finimize comes in. Don't be left out. Now, maybe you're thinking, Simon, I studied art history in school. I don't know how to read my own checkbook. Well, one, why do you have a checkbook? Who the writes checks? And two, why did you study art history in school? Art history is the degree that I made fun of while at university. It's like, what are you going to do with that? Work in a museum? And people were like, yeah, I really like art. And I'm like, well, that shut me the in it. Basically, Finimize wants to be your own financial advisor, and it's giving you the tools that you need to invest confidently and intelligently. And I'll add there, even if you're not intelligent, because they explain it. It's really plain English. There's none of those crazy terms that I always sarcastically use in a Business Plays video. It's just like, this is what's going on, this is what you need to know, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Maybe my friends are using those fancy business words because they want to look smart. I'm like, probably. I should mention the Daily Brief, particularly. This is particularly good because I am making like 1 million videos. I don't have time. Like, I look at those finance websites and I'm like, yeah, I guess I should read that. I guess I should know what's going on in the world. But I mean, I don't have time. I'm willing to bet you probably don't have time. And that's just the reality of the modern world. So, Daily Brief, basically, it provides like a really short, readable, or if you prefer listening, maybe you can't read and you want to invest, you can listen to the Daily Brief, and it basically gives you all of the essential information that you need to know. And if you ever want to go further with that information, there are 100 what they call packs, and these are basically in-depth profiles on companies that you might need to know about or you just want to know about so you can make smart investing decisions. What else do I need to say? I mean, finance is just something that you should probably know a little bit about, like knowing, investing and all of that stuff. If you invest now, it's going to be worth a whole lot more in the future. So get your thinking cap on with Finimize. You can get a 7-day free trial and 20% off if you want the premium yearly subscription. Just click in the description below. 7-day trial, completely free, cancel at any time and you won't be charged anything. Well, that's brilliant. So what do I have to say? Oh, if your money isn't working for you and you want to change that, or you just want to give yourself a crash course in finance and investing, check out our friends at Finimize. God, they are so much more eloquent than me. They come up with, and then they're like, just say this. So, okay. But no, it's really good. Check it out. Link below. That's certainly how Karl Marx saw things. That doesn't work because we just did the thing. But although he was born in Germany, Karl Marx was a man without a country in 1848, getting kicked out of every country he lived in for expressing liberal socialist views in his political publications and generally stirring the good old days where we could just throw out a crazy socialist. He eventually settled down in London without a pot to piss in, and his family would regularly get kicked out of their apartments for failing to pay rent. Regularly adopting fake names to hide from creditors, he often found himself housebound for long stretches because his wife was forced to pawn his trousers in order to put food on the family dinner table. Is that true? Marx's own mother once complained, if only Karl made more capital instead of just writing about it. She didn't say that, Daddy, did she? That's incredible. Fortunately, he had a good friend called Friedrich Engels. Yeah, Friedrich Engels was like Karl Marx's sugar daddy, who proved to be a handy source of free money, while Marx sat in his underpants scribbling articles and books that nobody wanted to read. Engels had a rich capitalist dad who owned a huge textile factory and who owned huge textile factories, plural, in Manchester and in Germany. So he's like a mega successful international businessman who owns all the capital. And it's how Marx lives for free. Oh, the irony. And Marx was happy to accept generous handouts from Engels and to avoid his family starving to death. It's reported that Marx was living communism before communism was a thing. It's reported that over the years Marx scrounged tens of thousands of pounds from Engels, who had scrounged it off his dad. And so it was. In 1848, living a lifestyle funded entirely by money scrounged for a rich capitalist, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels put together a very famous document which explained why capitalism was evil. Commissioned by London's Communist League, the Communist Manifesto, you've heard of that, described a revolution that was considered by the authors to be inevitable. Still waiting, aren't we? Of course, the concept of communism and socialism have been floating around for ages, and there are debatable differences between the two, although the terms are often used interchangeably and incorrectly. Socialism describes a system in which industrial production and the chief means of generating wealth is communally owned and managed by a democratically elected government, but individuals can still own private property. Socialists usually seek reform and change through peaceful democratic procedures. And everyone thinks that's communism, which it isn't. Communism is a more hardcore branch of socialism, which calls for the overthrowing of the entire structure. The manifesto explains the belief that wealth is unfairly distributed in a capitalist system driven by powerless workers who provide the economic value but live in conditions of poverty, while the big profits are siphoned off into the bank accounts of the already wealthy elite at the top.
Patrick, that's my money.
Have you learned nothing about sharing?
Marx and Engels wanted to rip down the crippling class divisions between the bourgeoisie, the capitalist owners of production, and the proletariat, the poor sods who sell their labour for tuppence an hour. A manifesto called for a complete central government control of all factories, agriculture, education, communication, transport, labour, and production. It's beginning to sound all a little bit like authoritarianism, isn't it, guys? Oh, all property rights would be confiscated under this new order in which private ownership of anything was forbidden. Society would live without class divisions, and distribution of goods and basic necessities would be overseen by the state and based upon the principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And the manifesto declared that violent communist triumph over the capitalist pigs was only a matter of time. There was no doubt that the working classes would eventually rise up and revolt.
Russian dog.
Capitalist pig.
Thinking Bolsheviks, you'll never take me alive.
However, the manifesto was light on detail on how exactly this was going to be achieved. Yes, it was. For example, the planned redistribution of land and property was probably destined to get a bit messy, but the manifesto didn't bother itself with that. Yeah, I mean, here, I live in the Czech Republic, which was taken over by the communists, and everything was nationalized, and people had their private property taken away. And it's like, it's a mess to this day. There are properties which are still held in, oh god, what's the word? There's a word for it, which I've subsequently forgotten, which is where there is a property that lost its chain of ownership, so there's people fighting over who owns it. Like, I owned it before the communists, and they have to go through this extremely drawn-out process of working out how to get their property back. And yeah, that.
Este edificio aquí, ¿cuál es?
También es un edificio que tiene locales comerciales de propiedad privada.
Expropiese, señor alcalde. Expropiese.
If like a communist government came over and took over my house and I'd be mighty pissed off. They'd be like, yeah, we're actually putting a good loyal communist person in the house that you earned the money for and paid for. It's like, please. I'd leave so fast. I would just leave. And although the manifesto helped to put the principles of communism on the radar and Marxist movements cropped up across Germany and Russia, neither Marx nor Engels lived to see a communist revolution. When Marx died in 1883, he was skint again and largely forgotten. Only 11 people attended his funeral. It's not recorded if Marx owned a pair of trousers at the time of his death. Okay, however, fast forward a few decades, the Russian Revolution of 1917, and the world finally got to see how communist power would work when the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power of the troubled and deeply divided country. The communist Soviet Union was officially formed in 1922, and it had a pretty good run, lasting all the way until 1991, so surely they must have been doing something right. Obviously, if you think that, you've never heard of the 20th century. It's not entirely clear what, though. Shortly after seizing control, Lenin and his communist comrades got busy on confiscating mines, mills, factories, and estates from wealthy landowners. But Lenin didn't get a chance to sit on the throne of power for very long, as he died from natural causes in 1924, and nobody was sad. Shortly before his death, Lenin had warned his comrades to be wary of the ambitions of the ruthless and cunning General Secretary, another guy you've heard of, Joseph Stalin, Man of Steel. Following Lenin's death, Stalin gradually seized control of the regime, and it turns out the party may have been wise to pay attention to their former ruler. If you're looking for a good movie recommendation, The Death of Stalin, check it out, worth watching, other than all that other that people constantly have a go at me for not watching, like The Princess Bride and Star Wars and The Godfather and Citizen Kane, everything that is regarded as good. Just go watch The Death of Stalin. It's perhaps not entirely fair to judge the effectiveness of communism on the dictatorship rule of Stalin, which officially ran from 1927 until his death in 1953, largely because Stalin was completely off his trolley. He got around the problem of running a painfully divided state by killing anyone who didn't agree with him. Jolly good? Not really. During the Great Purge of the 1930s, he's believed to have ordered the execution of around 300,000 members of his own army, alongside over a million, probably over a million civilians, including the children of families that were deemed to be traitors. I would definitely have been executed. Oh, good. They'd see this video, the communists take over and they'd see this video and be like, quickly kill him and all his family. Be like, oh, millions more detractors were deported or imprisoned in forced labor camps. Or maybe they'd keep me around. Maybe they'd be like, that guy's not bad at presenting videos. Let's get him to make videos praising communism. And I'll be like, you're not going to kill me, right? And they'll be like, no, we're not. Are you going to pay me? They'll be like, no. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. Just don't kill me and my family, please. I'm sorry for everything I said. I love communism. Following food shortages, and in particular, a dire crisis in grain production, Stalin implemented the collectivization of the Soviet Union's agriculture sector, which basically involved the forced consolidation of individual private farms into giant state-run collective farms. Peasants were no longer allowed to grow plants, even in their own gardens. This didn't pan out quite as well as hoped. In fact, it led to a massive fall in agricultural production, which in turn led to a devastating man-made famine between 1932 and 1933 that claimed between 7 and 14 million lives. 7 to 14 million lives. F you, communism. F you, Stalin. Marx hadn't mentioned any of this in his original manifesto. No, but it just left a big blank page for you fill in the blanks. And Stalin did. Stalin remained a bit of a bellend right up until his dying days. His personal guards had always been strictly forbidden from entering his private quarters on pain of death. One day, probably when he was a bit bored, he decided to have a bit of fun by testing the resilience of his guards. From his private quarters, he screamed out repeatedly as if in excruciating agony, and his devoted guards came rushing to the aid of their great leader. Stalin then had them all shot for failing to follow simple orders. I wanna react like I'm surprised, but it's Stalin, isn't it? It'd be like, yeah, then Hitler killed all the Jews. What? He did?
Ich hatte gute angetan. Von Jahren alle höheren Offiziere liquidieren zu lassen, wie Stalin!
Shortly afterwards, he found himself in genuine agony from a paralyzing seizure while alone in his quarters, and none of the guards responded to the screams. They weren't dumb enough to fall for that old chestnut. Stalin was eventually found unconscious and was dead within the week. Good! Don't cry wolf, Stalin. I feel like we should rename that. Don't cry Stalin. Don't cry Stalin. Hashtag don't cry Stalin. That also sounds like don't cry Stalin. Would be like if we do something that's really capitalist. Hashtag don't cry Stalin. The comrades of the Soviet Union rumbled on under communist rule with hungry bellies and blistered fingers until 1991, when David Hasselhoff turned up and smashed the Kremlin to bits with his bare hands while singing his timeless classic, Looking for Freedom. No, hang on, we're getting that mixed up with Germany and also fiction. But as silly as that may have sounded, some claim that the glitzy, trashy American TV soap Dallas, I've heard of it but I've never seen it, was partly responsible for the dissolving of the Soviet Union. And people would be like, oh come on, Simon, I can't believe you've never seen Dallas. Have you never heard of the Fonz? I don't even know if the Fonz was in Dallas. That could have been something else. That might have been Cheers, which I've also never seen. But there was a pub I used to go to that was themed like Cheers, so that's kind of all I know about Cheers. What the f*** was I talking about?
ADHD impairs a child's ability to function in
everyday life.
Yeah, people are like, why haven't you seen Dallas? I don't know, because I don't want to watch a soap from the 1950s or whatever. No one cares. Obviously not the 1950s. Under communist rule, citizens weren't allowed to watch or hear anything that hadn't been approved by the state, so good entertainment on TV or radio was completely out of the question. They couldn't even watch Bullseye on a Sunday evening. OG business place joke right there. But some deviants to the cause have managed to smuggle in black market videotapes of Dallas, which were sneakily watched and enjoyed by thousands, possibly millions of Soviet viewers who were awestruck at this perceived American way of life and wanted a bit of that for themselves. Of course you would. You'll be like, you have things? What? I wish I had things. It sounds about as far-fetched as a typical Dallas plot, okie dokie, but even the very last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, privately conceded that Dallas and other shows smuggled in from the US may have played a part in the growing discontent of citizens. They were probably a bit disappointed to discover that typical American-style life was nothing remotely like Dallas. Following increasing unrest in several constituent republics and a chain of internal power struggles and attempted coups, Gorbachev eventually declared his office extinct in late 1991, signaling the end of the communist Soviet Union. The 70-year test of communism may be accurately described as a bit disappointing, really, but on the plus side, they did manage to send the first man into space in 1961, so it wasn't all bad news. No, but it mostly was. It mostly was. I'd say 99% was bad news. Still, the Soviet Union wasn't the only country to go commie. Over the course of the 20th century, a third of the world fell under communist rule, including most notably China from 1949 onwards. Maybe the Chinese had better luck following the manifesto. No, I mean, China is communist in name and basically in like governmental style, but the Chinese economy, I mean, no, it's just not. Maybe the Chinese, no, scrap that, they didn't. And again, much of the failure was down to something as simple as grain production. Oh yeah, sorry, modern China. Old school China, bit more communist. Mao, bit of a dickhead. During Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward, peasants were encouraged to form and join collective farming associations, and many households ended up getting forced into state-owned communes. But the results were even more catastrophic than the collectivization of Soviet Union farms. Although figures from China are generally not reliable, it's reported that somewhere between 7 and 45 million people died from starvation in Chairman Mao's man-made famine, very probably on the higher end of that scale. Yeah, because it's China. They're not, you know, if they say a number, it's the worst one. Probably slightly higher than the worst one. It's one of the biggest and most appalling disasters in human history. Today, China, along with Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam, is still technically one of the very last bastions of communism, although China does appear to be open to more capitalist concepts in recent years, and North Korea doesn't officially identify itself as communist. I've been to all of those countries except North Korea. Cuba is the only one that is quite communist. Like, there's a separate currency for tourists. I mean, they still have money. You still buy It's just, you know, much more centralized. Laos, hardly. Vietnam, hardly. China, hardly. It's just in name. And North Korea, I guess so. I don't really know. I've never been there. I can't go there anymore because I've shit. I used to want to go, but then I became a YouTube person and I've shit on North Korea so many times that I can't possibly go because I would be tortured to death. But while success stories under communist rule, Yuri Gagarin aside, are very hard to find in comparison to the millions of deaths caused directly by communism, could it be the case that nobody has done it right yet and that there is still a very valid argument for a good functioning communist society that doesn't involve executions and starving the population to death? Well, no, not really. In fact, not at all.
Сука, 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 блядь, сука, 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 блядь.
Communism is just plain bonkers and would never work in a million years. Yes, I agree. I'm not sure I agree so strongly. Also, I mean, communism, bad. Socialism, I can see how it would work. I don't particularly like it. It's not how I would like things to work, but I get it. I think it's not an insurmountable obstacle to get a very socialist system working. But let's not. It's understandable how some people, it's always in the middle, isn't it? No one wants like unchecked rampant capitalism, or as I've described in previous videos, capitalism while being a dick. And also no one wants socialism, where it's like you work really hard, because I work really hard. I don't want all my money taxed away from me and given to everyone else, because I worked hard for it. And I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I'm also saying, let's just get it somewhere in the middle. Just get it somewhere in the middle. It's not that hard. Let's not go all the way over here. Let's not go all the way over here. Let's just be somewhere in the middle, okay? It's not that bad. It's understandable how some people felt aggrieved that the Industrial Revolution appeared to take away the tools of the common man and put more power into the hands of the filthy rich, and I can understand up to a point how annoying it is that somebody like Sir Shifty Philip Green, previous Business Blaze video all about him, is allowed to get away with siphoning off billions of pounds of profit into his already fat bank account while paying minimum wage to thousands of staff that drive his empire forward. But communism is not the answer. One of the crucial benefits of a capitalist economy is that it's driven by supply and demand, and the market prices enable companies to assess the current value of goods and services. When you hand all of that over to a centrally planned economy, you completely lose sight of what is actually needed or wanted and in how big of a quantity. Wow, Danny, I mean, judging by all of the previous videos that we've made and how often you bring up communism, I just thought you'd be like, Simon, communism is the answer, we're doing it. This is the start of the revolution. And Danny's like, actually, no, it's isn't it? I agree, Danny. Same page. It's actually a tremendous burden for a central power to control and oversee, and most of the time they'll be fumbling around cluelessly in the dark while the population starves to death. And yet, at the same time, mass famine is perhaps one of the strongest arguments a communist society can use to convince comrades to give up their private property and join in the collective farms in order to survive. There's also the small matter of a complete lack of incentive for comrades to work hard and succeed. Why should you bother? You can work twice as hard as your lazy neighbor, but you're never going to walk away with twice as much income. Yes, a communist society destroys any desire to innovate or produce anything new that might be useful. Instead, it creates a working environment in which most people just try to get away with doing as little as possible to tick the box. There is also the counter-argument to that if everyone isn't working for, innovations and supply and demand and business and seeking out money, then you get a more creative society because people, it's not if I go out and make a popular YouTube channel, then I'm going to get paid more. maybe if I just had a base level of income and I wasn't going to make more, rather than making something I knew would be popular, I would arguably make more business places because they're more entertaining and more, I feel, creative expression. And the only reason I really could do business plays is because I have enough money already. So that is the counter-argument to that.
So that was a fucking lie.
I've made it in a very weird way, I realize. Soviet workers had an old saying which lightly hits the nail on the head with minimum effort. We pretend to work, and they pretend to pay. Ba-da-bum-bum. History has also shown us that communism seems to propel proper knob jockeys onto dictatorial positions of power, such as Joseph Stalin. It's a system which seems to attract the corruptible and the deranged, who are more than happy to kill millions of their own citizens in the name of the cause and to keep a tight grip on power. Perhaps the truth is that we'll never really see a true communist society as outlined in Karl Marx's and Friedrich Engels' original Manifesto from 1848. We've never witnessed a true democratic separation of the classes, and we've only seen the erections of new divisions between the peasants and the new totalitarian state. So maybe there's still time for someone to show us how it's to be done, but it's probably best they don't bother. I can't help thinking that if only those greedy capitalist pig dogs handed out a bit more free money to Karl Marx, he might have been able to come up with a slightly better manifesto on how to bite the hand that was feeding him. Indeed. This has been Business Plays. It was brought to you by Finimize, which is a wonderfully capitalist service which you should check out below because they're actually very soured on communism now, so perfect sponsorship. Link below. Thank you for watching. Purchase the merch. I'm wearing the old classic. Smash the dislike button. I found this in the bottom of my pile of merch t-shirts and I was like, I haven't worn that one in a while. And it's very popular. So thank you everybody. Purchasethemerch.co. See you next time. If you want someone to get to the point, have you ever considered not watching Business Plays and maybe cracking a book? You knob.